The Witch and the King. The rope bit into Alara's wrists, chafing skin already raw from the journey. Each step through the churning mud was a torment, her bare feet slipping, her thin dress plastered to her shivering form. Rain, cold and relentless, lashed down from a sky the color of bruised plums, mirroring the fury of the mob that propelled her forward. "Witch!" they shrieked, their voices ragged with fear and hate, each word a stone hurled at her soul. She brought the floods. She blighted the crops. She stumbled, her knees giving way, but the rope pulled taut, jerking her upright. Hands, rough and unyielding, shoved her onward. The castle gates loomed, black against the stormy sky, its formidable stone walls seeming to absorb the light. The journey through the bustling courtyard was a blur of hostile faces, the metallic tang of fear thick in the air. Finally, she was dragged into the great hall, the clamour of the mob echoing off the high ceilings, their demands for her blood ringing in her ears. Alpha King Thorn sat upon his throne, an imposing figure carved from shadows and stoicism. His eyes, the colour of a winter sky, were fixed on Alara, unblinking, unreadable. They held no warmth, no pity, only a quiet, unnerving intensity. She met his gaze, not with defiance, but with a weary resignation that had become her constant companion. Her dark hair, plastered to her face, dripped onto the stone floor, forming a small, dark puddle around her feet. "She must pay!" a portly farmer bellowed, his face red with outrage. "The harvest is ruined, our children starve." A young woman, clutching a wailing infant, stepped forward, her voice trembling. "My husband's fields, gone. She did this, Your Majesty. She curses our lands." Alara remained silent, her gaze unwavering from the king's. The accusations were old, familiar refrains that had haunted her for as long as she could remember. Every drought, every plague, every misfortune had found its scapegoat in her. She felt the weight of their fear, a suffocating blanket that had long since extinguished any hope of understanding or mercy. Thorn raised a hand, and the cacophony died down, replaced by a tense, expectant silence. The air thrummed with unspoken demands. He surveyed the villagers, then his gaze returned to Alara, lingering on the subtle tremor in her hands, the almost imperceptible flinch when the rain-soaked hall grew colder. He saw not a cackling hag, but a slender girl, soaked to the bone, radiating an exhaustion that seemed to seep into the very stone around her. "You have heard their accusations." Thorn's voice was deep, resonant, cutting through the remaining tension like a honed blade. It held no emotion, no hint of his thoughts. "What say you, girl?" Alara's voice, when it came, was a mere whisper, hoarse from the cold and the terror. "I have done nothing," she said, her eyes still locked with his. The lie felt pointless, the truth futile. A collective gasp, then a renewed murmur of outrage rippled through the hall. Thorn ignored it. He leaned forward slightly, his gaze piercing. "You claim innocence, yet the evidence of ruin surrounds us." "I cannot control the rain, Your Majesty," she replied, a faint tremor in her voice, "nor the river's path." The king's mouth, a grim line, tightened almost imperceptibly. He studied her, searching for something, a flicker of guilt, a spark of malice. He found only a profound sadness, and something else, a deep, quiet strength that belied her frail appearance. A strange intuition, a feeling he rarely ignored, stirred within him. "Take her," Thorn commanded, his voice echoing in the sudden silence. "To the dungeons, not for execution, but for holding." A collective gasp swept through the hall. The guards exchanged bewildered glances. The villagers erupted in a fresh wave of protests. "But, Your Majesty," one of his captains stammered, confusion etched on his face. "The people demand justice. She is a witch." Thorn's eyes, usually distant, hardened. "My decision stands. She will be held, under close guard." Dismissed. His voice brooked no argument, as the guards roughly seized Alara, pulling her away from the baffled crowd. She risked one last glance at the Alpha King. His expression remained unreadable, but for a fleeting moment, she thought she saw a flicker of something in his eyes, a curiosity, perhaps, or a nascent understanding, that set him apart from the accusing faces of his people. The heavy oak doors slammed shut behind her, sealing her fate, for now, within the cold, unforgiving stone. A king's curiosity. The stone cell offered meagre comfort. Days blurred into weeks, punctuated only by a sliver of torchlight piercing the grimy slit high above, or the arrival of a tasteless, meagre meal. Alara huddled on the cold flagstones, knees drawn to her chest, the chill seeping into her very marrow. Yet, her mind frequently journeyed to brighter times, the scent of pine needles after a summer downpour, the feel of warm earth beneath bare feet. She recalled her mother's gentle hum as she tended herbs, a melody now impossibly distant, a phantom solace in this damp, silent crypt. Rage had long since departed, replaced by a profound, aching weariness. Thorn's initial visit was unexpected. The heavy thud of guards' boots heralded his presence before his shadow stretched into her confined space. He stood framed in the doorway, a formidable silhouette against the dim corridor light, his expression unreadable. Not a word passed his lips. He simply observed her. His gaze wasn't one of accusation or ire, but a peculiar blend of scrutiny and something Alara couldn't quite decipher. It was like being watched by a hawk, piercing and unwavering. She met his stare, refusing to yield, though a shiver traced her spine, not from fear, but from the sheer intensity of his focus. After what felt like an eternity, he turned and departed, the clang of the cell door echoing in the abrupt silence. He returned 2 days later, and then again. Each time, the ritual remained unchanged. He would stand there, mute, his dark eyes sweeping over her, absorbing her stillness, the subtle tremor in her hands, the unwavering defiance in her gaze. There was no interrogation, no demand for confession, only this relentless, quiet observation. This strangeness gnawed at Alara more deeply than any shouted accusation ever could. What was he seeking? What did he truly see? Beyond the castle walls, a different kind of quiet began to settle, thick with apprehension. The initial fervor surrounding Alara's arrest had given way to a simmering anxiety. Whispers unfurled through the village like tendrils of smoke. He hasn't executed her. She's still alive in the dungeon. The blacksmith, usually boisterous, spoke in hushed tones with the baker, speculating on the king's peculiar conduct. Farmers, returning from their fields, cast wary glances at the castle spires. Thorn, renowned for his swift and decisive justice, was now acting with an unnerving hesitancy. Villagers, accustomed to clear pronouncements and quick resolutions, found themselves adrift in uncertainty. Fear, an old companion in these lands, began to morph. It was no longer solely the fear of Alara, the accused witch. It was a new, chilling apprehension of their king. His quiet visits, his refusal to act, were perceived not as thoughtful consideration, but as a harbinger of something darker. "He's losing his mind," one whispered, "keeping the witch alive." Another suggested, eyes wide, perhaps she has cursed him too. The rumours, once confined to the shadows, now walked openly in the marketplace, painting a portrait of a king teetering on the edge of madness, captivated by a power he couldn't comprehend. With each passing day, Alara remained in her cell. The invisible chains of suspicion tightened around Thorn, and the fear in his kingdom deepened. Shadows of sickness. A chilling wail pierced the castle's thick stone walls, echoing the dread that had begun to seep into every hearth and home in Eldoria. First, it was a cough, then a fever that burned like wildfire, snatching the breath from the youngest villagers. The sickness, swift and unforgiving, had claimed 3 children by the 3rd day, their tiny bodies growing cold in their mother's arms. Panic, a beast with sharpened teeth, gnawed at the village's fragile peace. Whispers, once cautious, now solidified into angry shouts. The children's suffering became another stone hurled at Ilara's name. "The curse! It spreads!" bellowed a voice from the market square, carried on the wind to the castle courtyard. "She poisons us all!" The cries for her death, once a low hum, swelled into a furious chorus, each voice a hammer blow against Thorn's resolve. Within the opulent, yet increasingly tense, council chambers, Thorn faced his advisers. Lord Valerius, his face etched with worry lines, leaned forward, his voice a gravelly whisper. "Your Majesty, the people are at their breaking point. This sickness, it's unprecedented. They see it as her doing. The only way to quell this uprising, to restore faith, is to give them what they demand." He gestured with a trembling hand, the unspoken word, execution, hanging heavy in the air. Lady Isolde, usually a beacon of calm, wrung her hands. "They believe she draws the very rot from the earth into our children's lungs. We cannot ignore their fear, Thorn. It will consume us all." Her gaze, usually so steady, darted towards the dungeon's general direction, a flicker of genuine terror in her eyes. Thorn listened, his expression unreadable as a moonless sky. The pleas, the accusations, the raw fear, he absorbed it all. His gaze, however, was not on his advisers, but seemed fixed on some distant, unseen point. He could feel the village's fury, a palpable thrum against the castle's foundations. Yet, a peculiar stubbornness had taken root within him, an instinct that defied logic and counsel. "No," Thorn said, his voice cutting through the rising tide of their desperation, quiet yet absolute. A stunned silence descended, broken only by the crackle of the hearth fire. "She will not be executed." Valerius's jaw dropped. Isolde gasped, a small choked sound. "Your Majesty, this is madness! You risk everything!" Thorn rose, his movements deliberate, his presence suddenly immense. "I will not condemn her to death based on the hysterics of a frightened populace. Not yet." He paced slowly before them, his shadow stretching long and distorted across the polished stone floor. "Instead," he continued, his eyes dark and piercing, finally settling on Isolde, "she will be moved to a chamber on this floor, near my own." A collective intake of breath rustled through the room. "Near, Your Majesty," Valerius stammered, his face blanching. "Why?" "Observation," Thorn stated, the word like a cold shard of ice. "I wish to observe her, to understand the true nature of this curse. A dungeon cell offers little insight. This proximity will allow me to discern the truth, whatever it may be, and it will be a constant reminder to the people that their king holds the reins of justice, not their fear." His words were a shield, a decree. Yet beneath them, a different current stirred, one that even Thorn himself could not fully define. The advisers exchanged bewildered, horrified glances. They saw not a shrewd king, but a man teetering on the precipice of madness, his judgment clouded by an inexplicable fascination. The king was defying them, defying the very will of his people. And for what? For a girl they believed was the harbinger of their doom. The air in the chamber grew thick with unspoken dread, a premonition of darker days ahead. Unseen burdens. The chamber Thorn had assigned her was austere, yet undeniably more comfortable than the draughty cell in the castle's lower depths. Sunlight, a luxury she hadn't seen in days, streamed through a tall, arched window, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. A plush but simple bed occupied one corner, and a small wooden table with a single chair stood opposite. No bars, no chains, just a heavy oak door that clicked shut with an unnerving finality. Her initial discomfort was a prickle under her skin, a constant awareness of her proximity to him. She was a bird in a gilded cage, still a captive, but now under the direct gaze of the hawk. Her days settled into a quiet rhythm. Guards, silent as shadows, brought her meals and led her to a small, enclosed courtyard for a brief breath of fresh air. It was during these times, and sometimes from her window overlooking the castle's inner quadrangle, that she began to observe Thorn. He moved with a heavy grace, his frame radiating authority, even when he was merely striding across the courtyard. She watched him convene with advisors, their faces etched with the same fear and urgency that plagued the populace. She saw him hunched over maps, his brow furrowed, a quill poised in his hand as if weighing the fate of the world on its tip. The weight of his crown was palpable, a visible burden that seemed to press down on his broad shoulders. She witnessed the endless procession of petitioners, the angry whispers of the townsfolk demanding action, demanding her head, and through it all, Thorn remained a bulwark, unyielding in his decisions, even when those decisions isolated him further. There was a profound loneliness in his solitude, a quiet dignity that resonated with her own. He was a king, yes, but also a man carrying the collective anxieties of his people, a burden she now, surprisingly, felt a flicker of empathy for. One evening, as twilight bled across the sky, painting the castle battlements in hues of violet and grey, she heard the faint strains of music from deeper within the castle. A single lute played with a melancholic precision. She knew it was Thorn. She had seen the instrument in his study, half hidden by a stack of scrolls. The melody was haunting, a lament that spoke of weariness and unspoken grief. She leaned against her window frame, listening, a strange sense of connection forming in the quiet space between the notes. Later, much later, a soft knock came at her door. It was Thorn, a lamp in his hand, casting long, shifting shadows. He stood in the doorway, his silhouette imposing, yet somehow less formidable in the dim light. He simply observed her, his gaze intense but devoid of malice. She met his eyes, her own a mixture of defiance and a newly dawning understanding. No words were exchanged, no grand pronouncements, just a shared breath in the quiet, a moment where the unseen burdens of both their lives seemed to momentarily align, a fragile bridge built between accuser and accused. Then, with a slow nod, he turned and was gone, leaving behind the lingering scent of parchment and a faint, almost imperceptible shift in the air. The collapsed bridge. A piercing shriek tore through the morning, a sound that curdled the blood and set every nerve on edge. It wasn't the wail of a child, nor the cry of a beast, but the collective gasp of 100 souls, witnessing an impossible devastation. Ilara, tending the meagre herb garden in the castle's inner courtyard, felt the reverberations through the soles of her worn boots before the news reached her ears. The great stone bridge, the lifeline to the fertile lands of the West, had collapsed. Not a slow crumbling, but a sudden, catastrophic implosion. Traders, farmers, and vital supplies, all cut off. The already strained food reserves, dwindled by the pervasive sickness, now faced outright famine. Panic, a beast barely contained, erupted in the village below. From her vantage point on the battlements, Ilara watched as a frantic tide of villagers surged through the narrow streets. The air vibrated with their outrage. "The sickness! The bridge! It's her fault!" the cries began. faint at first, then growing in a terrifying crescendo. The blame, as always, found its familiar target. Thorn, his face etched with grim lines, stood beside her. He had been reviewing maps of trade routes when the first panicked shouts reached the castle. Now, his jaw was tight, his gaze fixed on the approaching mob. "They're coming for you, Ilara," he stated, his voice devoid of accusation. Simply a brutal fact. The roar of the crowd intensified, a monstrous sound that shook the very foundations of the castle. Torches, lit despite the morning sun, flickered like angry eyes as the mob pressed against the castle gates. "Bring out the witch, the one who curses us!" Their voices howled, a primal demand for vengeance. Ilara felt a cold dread seep into her bones. This was it, the moment she had always known would come. She braced herself, her hands clenching into fists at her sides. The heavy oak gates groaned open, revealing the king himself, silhouetted against the furious dawn. Thorn stepped forward, his presence commanding, yet dwarfed by the sheer volume of the rabid crowd. Beside him, Ilara felt a strange sense of detachment, as if watching a play unfold. "What is the meaning of this?" Thorn's voice, though amplified by the castle walls, struggled against the tide of their rage. "Justice, your majesty!" A burly farmer bellowed, his face contorted with fury. "The witch! She brought the sickness, she brought the bridge down, she must pay!" A chorus of agreement erupted, hands gesturing wildly towards Ilara. Thorn turned, his eyes meeting hers. For a fleeting second, she saw not the imposing king, but a flicker of something raw, vulnerable, in their depths. Then, without a word, he moved. He stepped in front of Ilara, his back shielding her from the seething hatred of the crowd. His arm, strong and unyielding, extended sideways, effectively pinning her behind him. The act was so sudden, so unexpected that even the mob faltered, their shouts dying down to a bewildered murmur. "She will not be touched!" Thorn's voice rang out, clear and unwavering, cutting through the stunned silence. His gaze swept over the crowd, daring them to challenge him. "This is my decree." Ilara stared at his broad back, a wall of defiance against the world. A tremor ran through her, not of fear, but of an emotion she couldn't name. It was a gesture of protection, raw and unbidden, from the very man who held her life in his hands. The crowd, bewildered, began to dissipate, their fury momentarily eclipsed by the king's shocking stand. A shimmering truth. Thorn's chambers were steeped in a profound gloom, the thick velvet drapes drawn against the world. Only a sliver of moonlight pierced the heavy fabric, offering a faint silver line in the inky blackness. Thorn himself lay still, his breathing deep and steady, a picture of undisturbed rest. Ilara, however, found no such solace. A peculiar energy vibrated beneath her skin, a low thrum that resonated through her bones and sent a tingling awareness to her fingertips. It wasn't unpleasant, yet it was undeniably disquieting. She pushed herself upright, her eyes gradually adjusting to the oppressive darkness. The air around her began to shimmer, subtly at first, then with increasing intensity. A soft luminescence bloomed around her hands, a delicate, pulsing glow that matched the rhythm beneath her skin. This wasn't the robust warmth of a hearth fire, nor the stark gleam of the moon, but something entirely novel, ethereal and ephemeral. A sharp, chilling fear pricked at her. Was this the witchcraft they spoke of, the insidious magic blamed for every misfortune? She gazed at Thorn, his face serene in sleep, and a desperate plea formed in her mind. "Don't let this be real. Don't let me be what they say I am." Yet the light persisted, a silent affirmation of something beyond her grasp. Unable to remain still, propelled by an inexplicable urge, Ilara slid from the bed. The strange energy seemed to guide her, drawing her towards the heavy oak door leading to Thorn's private library. She knew it was sacrosanct, a sanctuary only the king entered, but the impulse was too powerful to resist. Her fingers brushed the cool metal of the doorknob, turning it with a soft click that echoed like a thunderclap in the oppressive quiet. The library was a sprawling maze of towering shelves, each burdened with ancient tomes and scrolls. The air hung thick with the scent of aged parchment and dry ink. The shimmering aura around Alara intensified here, casting a subtle halo as she wove through the rows. It wasn't the books themselves that beckoned, but a specific section, tucked away in a shadowed recess. Her glowing fingers traced dusty spines until they settled on a worn, leather-bound scroll, unlike any other. It bore no title, only a faint, almost imperceptible symbol etched into the hide. Carefully unrolling it on a small, cluttered desk, Ilara's eyes scanned the faded script. The language was ancient, yet the words seemed to unfurl in her mind with uncanny clarity. "Of the truth-seers," it began, the letters flowing like a quiet stream. "They are born under the waxing moon, touched by the ethereal currents that govern the unseen world. Their purpose is to discern the genuine from the false, to pierce the veil of deception that oft shrouds the hearts of men and the very fabric of reality. A subtle gleam, a shimmer upon their form, betrayeth their awakening. They perceive the pulse of truth, a resonant vibration that guides their path. Yet their gift is a burden, for truth is often a bitter draught, and those who wield it are oft feared and reviled by those who prefer the comforts of ignorance." Ilara's breath hitched. The words mirrored her own experience, a chilling echo of the fear and blame that had pursued her for so long. She was a truth-seer. The realization settled in her bones, heavy and undeniable. The scroll continued, describing the diverse manifestations of their abilities. The capacity to sense deceit, to perceive hidden intentions, and in rare instances, to glimpse fragments of future truths. A faint clatter emanated from the main chamber. Thorn was stirring. Ilara swiftly rolled the scroll, her hands trembling slightly, and replaced it precisely where she'd found it. The shimmering light around her had faded, leaving only the lingering warmth of revelation. She was no witch. She was something else entirely. And the world, it seemed, was about to learn the truth. Confidences and clues. The lantern light cast long, dancing shadows across the antechamber as Ilara fidgeted, the warmth of the hearth doing little to thaw the ice in her veins. Thorn, ever the picture of composed strength, watched her with an unwavering gaze that was both unsettling and strangely comforting. Her confession, though rehearsed 100 times in her head, still felt like a precarious tightrope walk over an abyss. "It's not what you think," she began, her voice a reedy whisper. She clutched the rough fabric of her tunic, feeling the pulse throb in her fingertips. "The fires, the tremors, I don't cause them. I feel them before they happen." The words tumbled out, faster now, a torrent she couldn't stop. "It's like a whisper, a vibration in my bones, a taste of ash on my tongue before the smoke even rises. A premonition, I suppose, not a curse." Thorn's expression remained unreadable, his dark eyes like polished obsidian. He leaned back slightly, a subtle shift that indicated he was listening, truly listening, and not merely waiting for her to finish. "You're saying you predict these events, Ilara? Not conjure them?" His voice was a low rumble, devoid of accusation, yet heavy with consideration. "Yes, exactly." A rush of relief momentarily eased the knot in her stomach. It started small, a sense of unease before a storm, but now it's grown. The market fire, the bridge collapse. I felt them, a dreadful certainty, like a wave about to break over me. She squeezed her eyes shut, reliving the visceral dread of those moments. I tried to warn people, but it was too late, or they didn't understand. He rose, moving to the window, his silhouette stark against the moonlit landscape. A premonition, then. A truth-seer, as some old texts describe. One who perceives the strands of fate before they fully weave themselves. He turned, his gaze sharper. It would explain why you were spared execution. Some primal instinct, perhaps, in the face of such a unique ability. Elara stared, her mouth slightly agape. He wasn't scoffing. He wasn't condemning. He was theorizing. You believe me? A flicker of something akin to understanding crossed his face. Belief is a strong word, Elara. But I am open to possibilities, especially when those possibilities offer an alternative to the senseless destruction attributed to you. If you truly feel these events, then perhaps you can help us unravel them. The shift in his perspective was a breath of fresh air, a sudden burst of warmth in the cold, isolated world she had inhabited. How? We investigate, he said, his voice firm, decisive. We revisit the sites of these disasters, but this time you will guide us. Your senses, Elara, are our new compass. Their first stop was the charred remains of the market stalls. The air still carried the faint, acrid scent of burnt wood and despair. Thorn moved with a predatory grace, examining the blackened timbers. Elara, however, shut her eyes, focusing inward. The memory of the fire's onset was a dull thrum behind her eyelids. It wasn't just the heat, but a specific sensation, an unnatural pressure building before the flames erupted. She felt a phantom chill, a peculiar coldness amidst the inferno's memory. It wasn't just fire, she murmured, opening her eyes. There was a coldness, a bitter, deep cold, right before it began. She pointed to a particularly gnarled beam. It felt strongest here, right at the corner of Old Man Hemlock's fruit stand. Thorn knelt, running a gloved hand over the charcoal. His brow furrowed. Coldness before a fire. An anomaly indeed. His fingers brushed against a tiny, almost invisible fissure in the stone hearth behind the stand, a faint, crystalline residue clinging to its edges. He plucked a sliver, holding it to the moonlight. It sparkled, impossibly, with an inner luminescence. "This is not typical ash, Elara," he said, his voice low, edged with a growing tension. "This is something else entirely." The banished sorcerer. The metallic tang of ozone, an acrid memory of near catastrophe, still laced the air. Thorn's gaze scoured the scorched earth where lightning had gashed the landscape. "That pattern's no act of nature," he rumbled, dropping to a knee beside a patch of vitrified soil. "The ground's not just struck, it's fused." Elara shivered, a prickle along her skin. A lingering cold, even under the sun. It feels profoundly wrong. She closed her eyes, letting the psychic echoes of her premonition guide her. A faint, almost imperceptible tremor, a low thrumming under her boots, registered only to her. There's something deeper at play. Thorn watched, his expression unreadable, yet his silence held a new quality, not suspicion, but sharp focus. He followed her gaze to a gnarled oak, its bark unnaturally charred on one side, yet its leaves remained defiantly green. "Show me," he commanded, his voice a low current. She moved towards the tree, her fingers tracing a faint, almost invisible scorch mark on the trunk. This was no lightning strike. It was as if the tree's very essence had been violated. A soft, humming energy pulsed beneath her palm, a cold fire that made her recoil slightly. "It's like a signature," she whispered, turning to Thorn. "A magical one, but terribly twisted." Days bled into a relentless circuit of disaster sites, a blight that withered crops overnight, leaving a sickly sweet reek, a sudden, inexplicable drought that parched riverbeds where Alara sensed a faint, draining vortex of energy. Each time, she unearthed the subtle magical residue, the unusual telltale patterns, the cold hum of unnatural intervention. Thorn, meticulous, documented every detail, his mind weaving a mosaic of malevolent intent. "It's not random," Thorn finally declared, unfurling a map across the polished oak of his study table. Pins marked the locations of each catastrophe, revealing a chilling pattern. A web of destruction radiating outwards from the capital, each incident a deliberate strike. These aren't isolated events. Someone is systematically unraveling the kingdom. He pointed to a faint, barely visible symbol etched into the map's corner, a mark Alara had found at the heart of the blighted field. "This sigil, I've seen it before." Ilara's breath hitched. "Where?" Thorn's jaw tightened. "In ancient texts, a mark of immense power, rarely spoken. It belongs to a sorcerer, long banished from these lands, believed to be dead." His eyes, usually so guarded, now burned with chilling intensity. Malachor. Exiled centuries ago for attempting to seize the throne, for dabbling in forbidden magic. A cold dread settled over Ilara. But why now? Why resurface after all this time? Thorn slammed a fist softly on the table, the sound echoing in the sudden silence. He was banished, not destroyed. He coveted this kingdom, Alara, and he's been orchestrating these disasters to undermine my rule, to sow fear and chaos, to make the populace believe the land itself rejects its alpha king, all to pave his own bloody path back to power. The truth, when it came, was a hammer blow, revealing a far more insidious evil than either of them had imagined. "He wanted to blame you," Thorn added, his voice low, his gaze meeting hers, a silent apology in its depths. "He wanted to use your very existence as proof of the land's displeasure, to solidify his claim when he finally revealed himself." Truth revealed. The crisp morning air bit at Alara's exposed skin, a stark contrast to the burning intensity within her. She stood beside Thorn, not shackled, but with a quiet power that hummed just beneath her skin. The kingdom's populace was arrayed before them, a sea of anxious faces filling the courtyard, their murmurs a low, restless tide. Thorn, his armor gleaming under the nascent sun, held a scroll unrolled in one hand, his gaze sweeping across the multitude before settling on the gaunt figure of Master Galen, the royal sorcerer who stood, ostensibly, by his side. "For weeks," Thorn's voice resonated, clear and strong, "our lands have suffered. Our crops withered, our livestock sickened, our people gripped by fear. These calamities were not natural. They were orchestrated." He unrolled a second, then a third scroll, each meticulously detailing a different disaster, dates and locations noted with precise script. Every incident, every failure, traces back to the malevolent touch of sorcery. His eyes, usually a calm blue, blazed with a fierce conviction. "And the source is not the innocent. It is the very man sworn to protect us." A gasp rippled through the crowd. Galen, his face a mask of feigned indignation, took a step forward. "Your Majesty, this is preposterous, baseless accusations, fueled by superstition and the ramblings of a cursed girl." He gestured wildly towards Alara. Alara's own senses, however, were singing. The courtyard, once a cacophony of fear, now felt charged with a specific, icy dread emanating from Galen. The air around him shimmered, almost imperceptibly, with a residue only she could perceive, a sickly sweet scent of corruption, a faint, vibrating hum that spoke of unnatural power. It was his signature, unmistakable, weaving through the fabric of the kingdom's misfortunes. "He lies," Ilara stated, her voice soft, but carrying an undeniable weight that cut through Galen's bluster. She closed her eyes, focusing. The world narrowed to the cold, creeping tendrils of Galen's magic. She reached out, not with her hands, but with her mind, letting the truth-seer power surge through her. It was like plunging her hand into icy water, then feeling the current shift, revealing the hidden depths. Suddenly, the air around Galen twisted. A faint, opalescent mist began to swirl around his hands, then his face, not obscuring him, but highlighting the subtle trails of magic he had left behind. The mist coalesced, forming faint, fleeting images, a blight spreading across a field of wheat, a sickly green glow emanating from a poisoned well, the shadowy form of a beast driven to madness. Each image, though transient, was undeniably tied to the disasters Thorn had just described. The kingdom's people gasped, pointing, their whispers turning from fear of Alara to horrified recognition. Galen's facade crumbled. His eyes widened, a flicker of true terror replacing his indignation. He snarled, a low, guttural sound, and thrust his hands forward, a blast of dark energy erupting from his palms, aimed directly at Alara. Thorn moved with impossible speed, stepping in front of Alara, his shield raising to deflect the attack. The clang of magic against metal echoed through the courtyard. As the sorcerer prepared another strike, Alara, emboldened, focused her power. This time she didn't just reveal the past, she exposed the present. A brilliant, sapphire light burst from her, washing over Galen. The sorcerer cried out, a sound of agony, as the light seemed to strip away the magical protections he had woven around himself. His form flickered, his skin momentarily appearing translucent, revealing a skeletal, desiccated form beneath. The true monstrosity of the sorcerer was laid bare. Fear turned to outrage. Guards, galvanized by Thorn's unwavering stand and Ilara's astonishing display, surged forward. Galen, his power diminished and his true nature exposed, was overwhelmed swiftly. The kingdom watched, not with dread, but with a collective sigh of relief, then a burgeoning roar of approval. The silence that followed Galen's defeat was profound, broken only by the rustle of their clothes and the distant call of a bird. The people looked at Alara, not as a curse, but as a savior. Their eyes, once filled with terror, now held a dawning respect, even gratitude. Alara met their gazes, no longer shrinking from them. She was no longer an outcast, but an essential part of their salvation. Thorn turned, his eyes meeting hers. There was no longer the strained dynamic of king and prisoner, of wary protector and feared unknown. Instead, there was an unspoken understanding, a profound trust forged in the crucible of chaos and truth. He offered her his hand, not as a gesture of command, but of partnership. She took it, her fingers intertwining with his, a silent promise exchanged between them. The kingdom had found its truth, and in doing so, Alara and Thorn had found their shared purpose, looking towards a future where their strengths, united, would guide their people.